Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I'm assuming that for the last two tries it didn't work because I'm 99% sure that it didn't. Apparently, I was having a massive technical difficulty because I was being totally stupid and didn't realize that I had output muted but input going, which meant you got nothing. Alright, so, anyways. Without further ado, here is the Star Spangled Banner, and tonight's episode is about America, her history, and the beginning of it all, along with her oldest military branch. Thank God it works.
Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed, and the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, oh, the ramparts we watched were so gallant
Back again. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Kind of a little bit behind on the 8-ball. Again, I kind of totally screwed that up tonight. I was watching a movie, most of you have probably watched, called Dirty Harry Magnum Force, and I muted it and forgot that I muted it. And then paused it later and started the show, and yeah, well, que sera, whatever will be, will be. Tonight's episode is about the history of the United States. We didn't really just start in 1776. We started with the oppression of the United States when we came from Great Britain. Now, leading up to 1776, we had a lot of history. When I say this, we were... Hello, Julie. Sorry. Just noticed that. That in 1776 our country was founded, but the fact was that there was events that led to the American Revolution. Pretty much starting in the 1763 period, we're going to start from there. On January 1st, 1763, we had the Proclamation Line of the United States of America. The line was drawn by the British Parliament to make it so that colonists could not settle past the Appalachian Mountains. This was very unsuccessful because it was enforceable due to the great distances separating the British and American colonies. Alright, now, on March 1st, Grenville set up many acts on the colonists to raise taxes in the colonies and lower those of the taxes based on the wealthy British people. Alright, now, in February 1st, the Indians tried to play both sides of the unrest and conflict between the British and Americans, which however failed. The British then gave them gifts infected with smallpox to wipe them out with any bloodshed. Now, you can see where the beginning of the idea of harming our Native Americans came from. It wasn't originally American thought, it was actually a British thought. Many times things were shipped to them quite dirtily. As I'm part Native American, I truly believe that, I wouldn't say we owe them repercussions, because nobody owes anybody for the past, but I believe that things were done wrongly back then. Similar to ethnic cleansing, it really is, actually. We did a lot of things in the past that weren't quite clean to wipe out the Indian population. Anyways, carrying on. We then created the Sugar Act, which was a tax put on sugar and other foreign goods that the colonists needed. This helped the British East India Company raise their profits against the Americans. Then we had the Currency Act, where the colonists had a shortage of currency used to make trades, but the British had the gold and silver they needed to continue their trades in their colonies. See, all this led up to things. In August 1st, 1765, the Sons of Liberty began in New York City after the Stamp Act happened. They were led by Sam Adams, and all they wanted was freedom from British control. Alright, so moving forward, we have the oldest branch of the United States military. Back to a little history, it started with the Continental Army. Alright, as Major General and Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, George Washington won the military struggle for American independence. Now, we all know that, but remarkably, however, Washington's army won only 3 of 9 major battles that he oversaw and was often found retreating. This was not because of Washington, but some of the victories were more strategic than measurable in military terms, because the army was a ragtag, barely trained, half-starving, and woefully unequipped army. Because we didn't have the funds that the British Empire had. What we had was a lot of people who were farmers and such fighting for their nation that they believed in. The group was also hardly united for too much of the war and led by generals often squabbling or undermining or fighting with each other. The victories, while qualified, are remarkable in this light. Despite these various problems and disadvantages, Washington led an army that defeated the world's premier war machine of its day. Historians have praised Washington for his choice and supervision of the generals, how he encouraged morale and held together the army. His close coordination with governors and state militias, his cooperative relations with Congress, and his professional attentions to supplies, logistics, and training all contributed to the success of the Continental Army. A trained and experienced leader during the French and Indian War, Washington was a logical choice Jesus, I can't speak tonight, was the logical choice to lead the Continental Army. The Army was formed by the Continental Congress in 1775 after the outbreak of the American Revolution. Understand, again, 1775, not 1776. Washington then served as Commander-in-Chief of the Army throughout the war. When Washington assumed command, the Continental Army truly was not even an army. Rather, it was a loosely and poorly coordinated band of militias and citizen soldiers under control of the individual states. There were no established protocols for exercising coordinated authority, for supplying and feeding the troops, for transportation, or any other of the myriad tasks necessary for a field army. Because 18th century communication was extremely poor and maddeningly slow, way worse than even a telegraph system, gaining the Continental Congress required approval for anything took long periods of time. Under these conditions, fighting the powerful British Army was a gargantuan task, meaning that many commands and many things that were sent to the Army or to Congress, vice versa, were sent via horseback with papers. The amount of time was days, not seconds. What we have now is a massive improvement. Despite these impediments, Washington organized a seemingly motley amalgamation into 3 divisions, 6 brigades, and 38 regiments. He initially employed 1 state's militia, Major General Philip Schuyler's 10 regiments in New York, in an unsuccessful attempt to invade Canada. When it became clear that the Crown wanted to crush independence, Congress lengthened enlistment terms and ordered states to contribute regiments in proportion to their population. Washington then managed to force the British out of Boston in 1776, but his next tests under fire were defeats. New York was abandoned with Washington nearly captured. Fort Washington fell and almost disastrously. God, I can't speak tonight. Fort Lee was so slowly evacuated that the British seized precious cannons, muskets, and supplies. In response, some called for Washington's removal from command because of a series of blunders. The frequently critical General Charles Lee trumpeted Washington's critical indecision and expressed the need for General Horatio Gase to replace the general. But Washington reacted calmly while limiting the military damage. He retreated his army through Jersey and crossed the Delaware into Pennsylvania to put a barrier between the pursuing British troops and his exhausted, dispirited forces. As the 8-year war dragged on, Washington learned to fight a quasi-guerrilla style of warfare, a war of post, against a superior though tactically conservative foe. Washington also became skillful in protecting himself from sniping generals and interfering politicians. The problems, however, never ceased. In 1781, the Continental Congress was bankrupt and cut funding dramatically. In addition, citizen support was at its lowest. Army desertions continued at a rapid pace, and mutinies occurred. Despite this, Washington won important strategic victories. In 1781, victory at Yorktown with the French army and Navy's indispensable help sealed the war. In his 1783 farewell order, Washington thanked his officers and men and hailed the Army's combination of many different states into one patriotic band of brothers as a symbolic pursuit during war or peace. He returned to his commission as Commander-in-Chief on December 27, 1783, to Congress. The war ended on January 14, 1784, when the Congress ratified the peace treaty signed in Paris on September 3 of 1783. Notice the amount of time between the peace treaty and the ratification. Washington proposed a permanent standing army with an organized militia, arsenals, and academy, though this was rejected by Congress. Now, moving forward, what you need to realize is that it was established on 1775 under the guise of the Continental Army. Now, that army would be the United States Army. It is the nation's largest standing military branch and oldest. It is very proud of its traditions, though it is not nearly as tradition-bound as the Navy. The ethos that has guided the Army for most of its history is that of the citizen soldier, and it likes to consider itself the most egalitarian of the branches, which is why it has the lowest standards for joining, because it is the most citizenly. It should be noted that despite the general Despite the general perception of intellectual